We're going to be on Smith again, aren't we?
Look, by the time season rolls around, I can just see him coming back into my team. And I don't want him to, but he probably is gonna.
Brandon Smith. Yeah, that's going to be the thing, isn't it? With centre being what it's going to be, and watch, we're going to have to spend all this money up there, and then it's feel like, oh, nah, let's not go Grant or Robson or whatever, Jeremy Marshall King. Let's save that money and go Brandon Smith. Oh, I can't wait for that. All right, guys, we're
Oh,
in for the Roosters, and Egan Butcher is going to kick us off at 580K. Very, very annoying pick for me last year. That's all I'm going to say. Over to you.
yeah, Jamie. He was good at stretches last year, but he didn't get into it at the start like we were hoping, and a lot of us sold him, including me. But yeah, I mean, with this Roosters forward pack now improving, Wong with a late season bit of a breakout, and them signing Spencer Leniu, does he even make it? It's crazy how good the Roosters forward pack depth is at the moment. So, I mean, he's not going to meet his 42 average um, by any stretch of the imagination. So he's not one you want to chuck in your team.
All right, prediction. Is there going to be one injury before round one in this forward pack?
I mean, you'd think there'll be something minor, probably. I don't know
Yeah.
if there'll be something major, but there's always somebody at the club's like, oh, they've got a niggle. Are they going to perform? Like we've got Schuster for the Seagulls and stuff like that. Is he going to play? Isn't he? Probably something like that. But yeah, I don't know if it's enough to affect it.
We'll go a 2 week injury. That's what I'm going to call something 2 weeks, and I wonder how that's going to affect our teams. Anyway, Nat Butcher is next. At 741, had a cracking year last year. Obviously, averaged 54 there. You've got him there as an origin option. Talk us through it.
Yeah, Nampoch is a funny one because I've seen a lot of different opinions on what's going to happen with him this year. I've seen quite a few predictors put him on the bench with two of like Wong, Tupanua, and Crichton starting on the edges. And I mean, I guess that's possible at some point, but I mean, he performed quite well last year and they're already stacked with middle, so I don't know if he needs to go back there. At the
Hmm.
moment, I probably have him as staying at that 80-minute back row role, performing quite well. And then as a couple of the Roosters guys go off to Origin, he's Roosters options are actually potentially really quite sneaky buys because they play both round 13 and 16. So if you have some solid scorers there that work for your team at the moment, say if they're a little bit cheaper than they were a couple of rounds ago at the start of the season, they could be very valuable. It's why cheese is also potentially an option you can just hold until round 13, round 16 because of that, because of those rounds that they cover.
Yeah, for sure. And if Nat doesn't, let's just say he does play edge, but it's not 80 minutes, then we'll get him at sort of cut price through that period. And if there's injuries and stuff, right? So yeah, we'll talk about that through your pack predictor a little bit later. But let's go to Lindsay Collins next at 583. Played a lot of big minutes last year. Is he off the radar?
Yeah, we've had our eye on him after I think in 2021 he had a stretch where he really bulldozed uh and made quite a few good points and had a really increased PPM. But everything outside of that before and after has not been absolutely amazing for his scoring rate, even though he's probably getting 55 minutes sort of a thing. It's not really much more than the low 40s or 45 that you might expect.
Yeah, PPM's not great, is it? Angus Crichton, talk us through your thoughts on him. If he were to get that starting spot, what are you looking at with him?
Yes, so the key factor I think is how scared of bench should we be? So they've got a lot of really good players, a lot of middles, but they've also got competition with guys like Tupanua and especially Wong at the back of last year. So if Angus is starting, we've seen him in the past. He's been a fantastic gun right up the top of the edge position, like a 55 plus scorer. And he's priced at 36. So he has potential to be incredible value, but he needs that 80 minutes. So if we see like a Wong on the bench, I'd be more inclined to think that he's competing with Angus than competing with Nat Butcher. He needs to prove that he's back. He needs to prove that he should be in this team over a Tupanua and a Wong. So if Wong is on the bench, I'd be worried of split minutes. Tupanua a little bit less so because he can play a bit of middle and sometimes cover center and all that. But if there's not really that much to worry about in terms of bench edges, I mean, you just load up on him.
Yeah, definitely. So you're at the moment you've got Nat in that other edge role for big
Yep.
minutes. If he was not to be come round one, let's just say he's on the bench and it was Crichton and Wong starting, are you looking at one or both or?
It's very tempting to go both.
Mm,
I think that there's a good potential one of them loses a couple minutes, but I wouldn't be crazy worried about losing like 30 minutes or something, for example. So I would probably look to pick Angus just because of his history. And
yeah.
then if it goes wrong, well, he's about 50K more expensive. If you get which one's minutes are wrong, you can just switch over if that's what it looks like happening.
Yeah. And I think for Crichton as well, if he was to get that starting spot, then it's probably a higher chance that he's kind of closer to being back to where he was before. Would you think that?
I think so. It was a very
Yeah.
disrupted year last year for him, and he's come out in the preseason and said, sorry I let you down last year, guys. I'm ready to go."
Mm,
And so if he does end up starting, we could have some faith in him there. And I mean, who's to say that Wong being on the bench doesn't mean that he still gets like 60, 65 minutes at least?
yeah.
And even that's still value. He only played 50 last year and still averaged in the sort of low 30s. If he's getting 10, 15 minutes more than that, he's still going to be value. And then if he plays 80, well, that's incredible value.
Mm. And Wong's minutes were a bit up and down, obviously, last year, but that's an absolute embarrassment of riches, isn't it? If Crichton is actually back to where he could be or close to it, even 10%, 15% down, that pack is just wild. All right, Zach Docker Clay, we won't even bother talking about him. He's nowhere near it at the moment with the craziness that's there. Luke Keary at 547, obviously a bit more of a name player. What should you say to people that are newer to fantasy?
Yeah. Luke Keary, big name, gets a few highlight plays, but doesn't dominate the overall work rate and base stats. Bit like Ezra Mam, sort of bit like Tom Dearden. But if you look at his scores at 5/8 compared to where he's halfback and taking a bit more control of the team, there's nearly a 10-point difference. So I think it was
Yeah,
like
well.
32 or 33 average. So I mean, I've got him lower than what he's averaged last year.
Definitely. Spencer Leniu, been a big hot topic, obviously signing a new contract to come over to the Roosters. Do you see any uptick in minutes from him? Because last year was really strange compared to the year before with minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah, Lenu is signed on pretty good money. So a lot of people are instantly going, well, good money equals good minutes.
Mm,
But I mean, you stop and look at this Roosters pack and where do they come from? He also is the perfect role player
yeah.
for that 30, 35-minute absolute weapon impact. So if he is starting in the starting side, then you've definitely got to stop and consider him. But if he's on the bench, I don't know if I really expect anything different to what he was at Penrith, like a 30, 35-minute, really big, really powerful interchange role for a good team. Um, Considering you've got your Warrior Hargreaves, your Collins, your Terrell May as well, I don't know if he can push up to really good minutes if he's on the bench.
Yeah. And then, guys, when we're talking about like starting or bench, it's definitely likely as a starter, you can play the same minutes as you do on the bench. But if you think of you starting, let's just say you played 18 minutes, right? Because he's an impact guy. He's then very likely to come on for sort of that last 16, 17, 18, 20 minutes at the end of the game as well. And if you were to be a bench middle, good chance you come on at sort of anywhere between 20 and the 30 mark. Let's just say it's 25. You play 15 before the break. So he goes hard for that 15 minutes. He goes hard for another 15 after the break. And then he's done for the game because Collins and these type of guys come back on, or it was Fisher, Harrison, Leota at Panthers. So that's usually how it works. But we also do see some forwards who come off, if they do start, they come off after 15 minutes or 20 minutes and they never come back on. That can happen with certain guys. I don't think Spencer's that guy. You might see it with like a Fletcher Baker or something last year. where he might just get the 20 and that would be it. And there's other guys that would happen to. But yeah, that's where Scoop's saying more about the starter or the bench kind of minutes there. But something to watch, something to hear from Robinson. But we do know that he just said he wants him to be him, right? Just be exactly what he was at Panthers and show that for us, and hopefully that'll help us win. So yeah, Spencer's an interesting one. He really, he's not going to lose you money, right? And his PPM was pretty junk last year compared to the years prior.
Yeah, it decreased a little bit when he got a couple more minutes, but it had been over 1 in the past.
Yeah.
So to be honest, I mean, Panthers have been pushing around all the other teams in the league for a while now. So if he goes to somewhere else where even there's a bit of a drop, he could get more tackles and push that back up.
For sure. Joey Manu, 639K. So 46.5 was the average last year. Definitely someone that I always seem to grab, anywhere from about round 5 to round 8 or 9 there, after he's lost a bit of cash. Is there any thought in starting with him this year?
I think with the Roosters' tough draw, it's a little bit hard to, but I mean, it's pretty dire, isn't it, in the center position? So if we end up with something like Manu shifting to 5/8 to begin the year, and Kiri just gets left out of the team, or something like that, so then they can include a Billy Smith or something who performed well from last year,
Yeah.
then I would definitely look at him. Manu in spine positions is really good. Start the in center. He's sort of around that peak price usually at the beginning of the year and drops a little bit. But yeah, for Origin, you are definitely going to want him. As I said, round 13, round 16, those first 2 buys he covers. Plays the Cowboys. He'll be missing probably Cotter and probably at least 1 or 2 others. And then round 16 versus Bulldogs. And then Tigers and Dragons after that, possibly fullback for one of them if Teddy's rested, and maybe at centre. So there's going to be big points in that mid-season. You are 100% going to want Joey Manu from, say, just before Origin at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you're getting some fullback, some center, it doesn't matter at that point, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm excited for that. That seems to be a good little time. All right, my boy Terrell May. I've spoken enough on him. I was like, before we're gonna do this video podcast, so I was like, oh, we get to talk about Terrell again. But up to you, mate. What have you got on him?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of these fringe guys at the moment who have these monster reserve grade stats, and in the next couple of years, when a few blokes retire, they're going to be fantasy guns. But as we've touched on so many times already, the Roosters 4-pack is humongous, and I don't know if it's this year. If Warrior-Hargreaves retires at the end of the year and he takes over a starting spot, next year could be his year where he averages 50 plus in 50 minutes. But for this year, we really need to see that happening in order to go anywhere near him. He had a couple of big minute games in the finals, but I think they were missing quite a lot of players. So it might just be something to watch out for.
I think it was just the one. I think Hargraves missed one of them, or was missing something. But obviously bringing Spencer over hurts as well is probably the main issue. But it's more just if they see him, I think, as being that guy that really was the alpha in the pack. Like obviously you've got Hargraves, but he doesn't move as well as what May does at the moment, being a younger player. So it's just if they need that body really, like, because they've got heaps of good players, like he just brings something different. So I think we just need to see and hear what that's going to be for him. But it probably is more of a one injury away, and then he's that bigger minute guy. Hey, like at this point, I'm worried. So we'll find out. All right, Moriarty, heard a bit about him, but not expected to play at the moment. Power goes well, same deal. And then you got Victor Radley. What's going to happen with him this year? Like, there's so many games last year where he was very close to 80 minutes or played 80 minutes. Do you see him dropping a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely think there is potential for him to be dropping down to around that 60-minute mark pretty consistently. I think I'm trying to remember how many people in the Roosters pack was injured last year, and it was quite a lot. So he ended up playing monster minutes. And I mean, look at his average. He still only averaged mid-40s. He's not somebody who's built around fantastic fantasy scoring. So, I mean, he's not really somebody you should consider. One of those other big name players that can trap a few rookies.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose that question's going to come up with Connor Watson. Then does he play a little bit of 13 and Smithy kind of gets a couple extra minutes? We'll have to try and work that out in trials and the like. But Billy Smith is next, fighting for a spot, isn't he? Probably a decent chance of missing it, even though he kind of dominated the back end of last year after we all sold him.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm really happy to see that Billy Smith had a good year last year. He's one of those guys that had been fighting injury for a long time and finally put it all together, and we saw why he'd been hyped up. So I'm very pleased that we got to see good version of Billy Smith. But yeah, as you said, you've got Dom Young coming over from the Roosters. You've got Daniel Tupou on the other wing. You've got Manu in the centers potentially. And then you've got Suali'i. So where does Billy Smith fit in? I don't think he's going to get in unless you have an injury in there or Manu goes to 5/8.
Yeah, well, they don't play Suoliti, but geez, like because he's gonna have to play center, right? Suoliti. So and he's not as good there. He's obviously super talented, but so is Billy. Like it's different, but yeah, it's gonna be fun to watch. This team, if they don't start well, seriously, like for a fourth year in a row, whatever it is, what a terrible side. All right, Mr. Brandon Smith, go ahead. 540K. Is he pretty much the same price as last year, isn't he?
Yeah, well, it's like, do you want to spin the wheel and potentially get hurt again or not? I think I owned him 3 times last year. One was bad because he got injured straight away, hurt his ribs. Second time was okay because I jumped on at a decent time and made about 100K. And the third time I had a couple of poor scores and then a couple of decent ones to the back end of the year. But yeah, only those back end of the year good scores is sort of what we're hoping for, where those increased minutes at an increased scoring rate when the Roosters are doing a bit better. So
Yeah.
we've seen him in the past have a pretty decent try scoring rate, burrowing over close to the line. I mean, he's called the block of cheese for a reason. And so we just have to be a little bit more certain of what Connor Watson's role is in his minutes. There's potential that he could play 65 at a slightly increased PPM, which would put him in the high 40s and make
Yeah.
him good value, maybe even up to 50. But there's also potential that he might only play 60-ish. Like he might play 65 a lot of the time, then have a couple minute games that bring him down to 60-minute average. And then that would sort of put him pretty middling around the low to mid 40s, which is still some value, but not great. And when you are looking generally for players with 8 to 10 points of value, and his upside is probably only about 10 points, and his downside is like 4, it's always someone that's going to be a risk. But he does have dual. Roosters are expected to do well, and the mid position's not got a lot of amazing picks in that sort of price range. So I think he is one of the better picks. It just depends on how you think the Roosters are going to line up this year and use him.
Yeah, so what we've got in the pros for him is that surely they can't start as bad as they did last year. I don't know, maybe. The injuries for him really, really bad, and he did not look anything like himself for those two. But he didn't have the risk of minutes being taken off him. So he's got the two in the pro category this year, and one in the negative. And I suppose that if they think he's super important to their side and is that sort of 60 to 65 guy. Remember, guys, he doesn't really ever play 80 minutes anyway. So, at highs, it's like 70, 71. He's not that type of guy. He is an impact. He gets attacking stats. He does all those types of things, whereas a lot of our other hookers need those defensive stats, right? That most of them are, 50 tackles, 35 meters run, 1 tackle break or something like that with 3 misses. And it's like, yay, 50. Whereas Smithy can do it in lots of other ways. So, yeah, if you think that he's just that important and he's through his injuries and really like if you're a sportsman and you have that bad of a year, obviously not a lot of it was his fault, but if you have that bad of a year, you do want to avenge yourself and your teammates, right? We're hearing that from Adam Elliott, like a big chip on his shoulder, like wanting to show his teammates that he's fit and he can play that 13 role and do really well. You're hearing that from Josh Curran that he wants to kind of avenge last season. So well, everyone's like that. Everyone's competitive, and that's what he's going to want. So if you want to play that narrative as well, it's definitely there because, yeah, I suppose he's coming more and more on our radar just with the fact that center is so bad. because I like in the hooker video, I didn't really talk about him too much. Like I was like, oh yeah, he could be solid. There's potential to go well, but it's very risky, blah blah blah. But you have to break it down a little bit more, I think. And yeah, I think what's he? Is he? I think he's like 17% or something owned, and I think he'll end up a bit more if center's pretty poor for sure. So yeah, there you go. It's enough on Brandon for a while. Sandon Smith, the better Smith, right? 360K. He was good last year at 7, wasn't he? But he needs an injury just.
Yeah. He also had times where he came on off the bench and actually played more minutes than Brandon Smith at some times, which was pretty annoying when in the back end of the year when I owned him. But then he picked up a bit. So Sandon
Yeah,
probably goes back to reserve grade now with Connor Watson returning.
for sure. And Suoli, we're expecting him on in centers, right? And you're avoiding there.
Yeah, look, he scores way better on the wing than he does at center, which I mean, overall isn't a surprise, but given how tall he is and how well he can jump, I'm even less surprised. So you really need to drop like a Daniel Tupou for him to get injured for you to have Suoli on the wing, and I just
Mm.
don't see them doing that. And he's leaving next year. Why would you displace and mess that up for somebody who's not even going to be there next year? So I think that he'll do all right. He'll plod along, score mid 30s, but he's priced there, so not really interesting.
Yeah, because there was wing and goal kicking, and Roosters playing well, and that was a 50. So the triple whammy there, which worked out. James Tedesco, 670K, came out and said that he put a bit too much pressure on himself, tried too hard. There's a lot of things that happened last year for him that he wasn't at his best, but this is his lowest scoring average if for 80-minute games ever, I believe. I think it was 50 plus all the way through Tigers as well. So getting a little bit older. What are your thoughts on Teddy coming into round one?
Yeah, I think that Teddy, he's an outside back starting to get towards the back of his career, but as you said, he wants to fire back up this year, and he really did improve a bit in the back half of the year. So I think that we haven't seen the end of him just yet, or the end of his fantasy relevance. So I think that there's a good chance we see the standard Teddy projection model drops a little bit to begin the year, revs up for Origin and the run home. So I think you can probably pick him up at low 600s at some point or around that price and do pretty well. But yeah, to begin the year for somebody that is, I mean, it'd be very, very difficult for him to get dropped for Origin. And if he was, he wouldn't be playing well, so you wouldn't want to buy him. So you just assume that he's probably going to be someone you want to pick up late in the season or a couple of rounds into the season if he starts to fire at a slightly cheaper price.
Definitely. Tupou will leave out. He won't be of relevance. Tupanua there at 421. You've got him there as a decent buy if he is starting. Just tell us a bit more about Tupes and why it would still be a risk if he was starting.
Yeah, Tupanua is probably my least favorite out of those three options to start at Edge that have not named Nat Butcher. So he's just re-signed with the
Yeah,
Roosters, which is good indicator that they like him there and they want him to be having an important role. But he's got a little bit more versatility, plays in the middle a bit more often than somebody like Angus or Wong. So I really do see him being the one to lose minutes if it ended up being him plus one of the other two starting in that Butcher bench. I don't think he is as likely as the others to play 80 and can get pushed around a bit. In my pack predictor, which we'll get to shortly, I have him sort of sitting around and doing a little bit of both from the bench. And yeah, he'd have to be starting. And even then, there's just not quite as much upside as those other two from what we've seen.
definitely. Hargraves will leave out. Sammy Walker is 685. I definitely see him having potential to break out, but it's a tough starting draw, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing is, we've got Cleary, we've potentially got Hines for those who want to attack the soft draw, and I mean we've got Fogarty. So for this year, he's sort of it's hard to make him work because you've got to leave somebody out who potentially could be very good. I think that in another year, especially if we didn't have those elite options, you might have a look at him because signs are there for a Roosters bounce back and potentially a step up for Walker this year to move into the next category of halves, but there's not as much security as other guys. So I would leave him and just watch him and keep an eye on him in the background.
Yeah, could he be one of those targets closer to that origin time for around 13, 16 kind of half gun?
That's probably a better shout.
Hmm.
Um, he's quite probably going to be in the Origin team eventually, but not this year,
Yeah.
unless DC randomly comes out and retires or something. So I think that that's a pretty solid shout. He could be a very good scorer through those couple of weeks that the Origin stars are away, and I mean just through that period in general.
We could end up with sort of 3 or 4 Roosters players for those two buys, hey?
Yeah, there's a few good options. I mean, we could have Cheese, one of those edges, and a
Manu.
Walker and a Manu.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. Connor Watson, he's so expensive, hey, at 550. So avoid unless he ends up having to play starting hooker when he's a bit cheaper. Uh, Nafahu White at 411. Does he even make the side? He was actually pretty good last year, hey?
Yeah, and that's the thing. He was good, but he's like 20th man, something
Yeah,
like that. It's crazy how
even
good the
Egan.
Roosters depth is.
Yeah. And then Siwa Wong, obviously lots of talent, right? That's the big thing with him. Tell us your thoughts on Siwa.
My current thoughts are that Angus will start and Wong will be bench.
Wow.
And in that case, Wong isn't really an option. But if Wong is starting, he's cheaper than Angus, doesn't need to go as high. He doesn't have quite the pedigree, but he doesn't need to hit 50. He's priced at low 30s, mid 40s would be fantastic for him in around that 80-minute mark. So I think that you have to watch the bench it's a bit like a 5 point discount version of Angus, and you just have to watch out for similar things. Is Angus on the bench? Is Tupanua on the bench? Or are there two of them and Nat Butcher's on the bench?
This is obviously a pretty crazy team for all those things. The Terrell Mays, Wongs, Crichtons, Butchers, Tupanuas, Brandon Smiths, right? So good thing for us, we get them in the first round of team lists, which is awesome. So guys, just remember that because there's the 2 Vegas games, we get team lists for them on the Tuesday before, I believe is what it's going to be. And then the week after, we get the rest of the round 1 team list. So yeah, you'll at least be able to lock in these guys in that first couple of games, and then we can go from there. And then Dom Young, he's obviously being spoken about a bit as well, given he's at a new club and is super talented, obviously scoring a million tries. Can he do that at the Roosters, or can he beat that?
Yeah, that's the thing. He was basically the top try scorer of last year, and although he does move to a better team, how much higher can he go? It's like trying to buy Alex Johnston because at the start of the year, because it's like, oh, he can score 30 tries and he only scored 17 last year. What an upside. And he's next to Manu. So if Manu is there, I don't see him scoring 30 tries. But I mean, he's quick and has potential to go pretty well at some point from a try scoring point of view. I just don't know if he's a really good fantasy option.
Definitely. Okay, let's go to the pack predictor. And you've got Brandon Smith there at 60 minutes at hooker there. So that's a 5.7 bit of value there if he's at his current PPM at 0.75. So yeah, it's up and down, obviously, depending on the numbers at Storm were great. Obviously, when he was Dally M hooker of the year. Last year, they weren't as good. So we'll see how those minutes go. You've got Watson just getting, you got 20 for Watson at hooker and 20 at lock. Suppose that could probably go up, probably go down potentially. 40 would be probably the max. So yeah, let's just take that with that. Angus Crichton, he's got that 50 and 30 with split with Wong, and 80 for Nat. So yeah, again, just see this could change, obviously, depending on how things are named. Lindsay Collins should definitely be up at the 55. You got Spencer Lanier at 35. He'll be somewhere there, 35, 30. And then May at around the 30 mark if he's in that side. So yeah, probably the only one that could move up or down is Watson. Maybe Hargraves is like a 35 guy. But yeah, you still
Yeah,
kind of
there's
like,
there's a little bit of movement that you could
yeah,
potentially do. I just didn't like
clutching at
dropping
straws.
Hargraves too much after, I mean, he was averaging 50 minutes sort of a thing last year when he was in the team.
Yeah.
But I mean, he has to slow down somewhat, so I've reduced him a bit.
But yeah, it just shows that there's not a lot of wiggle room for a couple of these, the fringier kind of front row forward guys. Hey, the Lenus, the Mays. We need 40 from Terrell. We need 40 odd from Spencer as well. And it's just hard to find it. So you could easily just leave out a few of these guys from your team, hey, and just see what happens and kind of pick them up through here. Given they don't have their first buy until round 14, you can wait until sort of round 3, 4, 5, 6 and still bring them in there and have a big runway of cash and points to be made for sure. So you spoke about their buy schedule being fairly tough with Broncos up first, the Eagles, if with Trebojevic and everyone going well. Bunnies should be bouncing back, Panthers in round 4. So that first 4 is pretty tough before it opens up a tick, but then you still have some tough games. So you see a lot more green and blue through the mid part of the season. So as we were talking about, that could be the time to buy, hey?
Yeah. I mean, you look at that, you've got depleted Cowboys by Eels, who might be slightly better, but don't expect to be world beaters, as sad as I may say that. But then you got, I mean, teams that could improve, but they're Bulldogs, Tigers, Dragons. They're not going to be crazy tough compared to the others, so you can definitely see a pathway to points.
Yeah. Well, really the only tough one is toughest one is Panthers, right? Most outside backs and halves can score pretty poorly. Middles, a lot of time you get more tackles against Panthers. We've seen some crazy, crazy numbers there. Was that the McInnes game? We were in 80, was against the Panthers, I believe. And a few others, even when Harry Grant comes up against the Panthers, it's like 63 tackles, 8 misses and shit like that.
Yes.
Broncos on their day can be a tough matchup as well, and then Storm here and there. But most of the other guys, it's pretty fine for scoring. So, especially for the edges, we're not really talking about outside backs for this team, are we? So it's not going to affect them too much, which is fine. And yeah, just probably the big thing I'm seeing in that pack predictor. Yes, it could change here and there, but majority of the guys there are looking to either hold value or lose value just because there's so many mouths to feed, right? So they're potentially a bit of a
100%.
trappy Roosters pack, and just something to think about, right? So it's really cool for you to have these numbers up here, mate, to help people out, just to be like, oh, okay. Sometimes we look at these packs and it's like, oh, wow, there's, it's a new pack, there's injuries, whatever, and there's so much room to grow. Whereas this one, it's like, oh, if you get the perfect roll, great. If not, could be just a bit of a nothing pick, eh?
Yeah, and it, as you said, there are a few guys who, if they line up in particular ways, can be traps. And another thing is, as you said, it's a split team lists. If you're not certain about some of these guys and worried about picking a couple of traps, maybe just go for the one and leave some of the others and just wait to see what other options emerge for the rest of TLT. Because especially if you're trying to go like a Rooster's Edge and Cheese, and then you have to pick from the value in the other positions, you might get stuck with somebody who you don't want, or you might not be able to fit somebody into your team that you really do want who unexpectedly got a good role. So just be careful when figuring out how many Roosters you want to start with in round 1, because they could be good, but it could also lock you into a position you're not particularly happy with.
Yeah. And just remember, you do have trades, guys. So round 2, or round 3, if one of these guys does really well, they're all sort of, anywhere between 440 upwards. They're not going to absolutely, make 50, 60, 70K in 1 week, these types of players. So you can pick them up in round 2 or 3. There's going to be someone that doesn't work out that you could trade them to. But on the contrary, if you leave them and they don't actually perform like you want, and it is a bit of a minutes trap or something like that, then you did avoid it. So I think either way, you're going to be fine, right?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna pick Smith. He's probably gonna work his way back into my team,
He's got
and
your
then I'll
last name,
probably
mate.
leave the edges unless I don't see a bench edge or Butcher's bench.
Okay. Yeah, so 1 or 2 maybe. Yeah, there you go. Very interesting, guys. That's the Roosters. We're going to get into the Manly Seagulls in the next one, which you'll see in the next couple of days.